Arrival of the Guru. In the autumn of 1981, a private jet descended over the vast high desert plains of Oregon, carrying a man whose presence would soon ignite one of the strangest and most disturbing chapters in American history. His name was Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh, later known simply as Osho, a spiritual teacher from India whose blend of meditation, philosophy, and sexual liberation had captivated tens of thousands of followers across the world. For his disciples, his arrival was a moment of salvation, the beginning of a promised utopia. For the locals of Wasco County, it was the start of a nightmare. Rajneesh was no ordinary guru. By the time he landed in Oregon, he had already built a controversial reputation in India. In the city of Pune, his ashram had attracted wealthy Westerners, drawn by his radical teachings that combined Eastern meditation with Western psychology and his insistence that spirituality and material wealth could coexist. Critics labeled him the sex guru, scandalized by his open embrace of free love. Admirers, however, saw him as a visionary who dared to challenge tradition. But the controversies in India combined with mounting pressure from authorities made his continued stay there untenable. America became the new frontier for his grand experiment. The chosen site was the Big Muddy Ranch, a sprawling 64,000-acre property in rural Oregon. Purchased quietly by his organization, it was soon transformed into Rajneeshpuram, a city in the making built from scratch in the middle of nowhere. To outsiders, it seemed impossible. Thousands of devotees in red and orange robes descending on a barren landscape, working day and night to build homes, roads, farms, and temples. To insiders, it was proof of their devotion and their belief that they were part of a world-changing movement. The early images of Rajneeshpuram are striking. Convoys of buses bringing followers from airports, bulldozers leveling the desert to make way for new buildings, crowds of sannyasins name for Rajneesh's disciples singing, meditating, and working in unison. At the center of it all was Bhagwan himself, though he remained largely hidden from view. Often silent, surrounded by bodyguards, and transported in a fleet of Rolls-Royces, he projected an aura of untouchable mystique. For his followers, his very presence was a form of blessing. For skeptics, it was a sign of cult-like devotion. But beneath the surface of this spiritual experiment lay tensions that would soon erupt. The arrival of thousands of outsiders in rural Oregon did not go unnoticed. The tiny nearby town of Antelope, population less than 100, suddenly found itself outnumbered by red-clad strangers. Locals watched with unease as Rajneeshees bought up property, took over local businesses, and inserted themselves into community politics. The clash of values: traditional, conservative ranchers versus cosmopolitan, sexually liberated devotees, was immediate and explosive. The media, sensing the drama, swarmed the story. Headlines spoke of a cult invasion, painting Rajneeshpuram as both spectacle and threat. Television cameras captured images of ecstatic disciples dancing in the desert, intercut with interviews of fearful locals who spoke of losing their community. The narrative of utopia versus nightmare was set, and the world watched as Oregon became the stage for a cultural confrontation unlike anything America had seen before. At the heart of this drama was a fundamental question. Could a religious movement build its own city within the United States? And what would happen when that movement's ambitions collided with local and federal laws? For the Rajneeshees, Rajneeshpuram was the fulfillment of their master's vision. For everyone else, it was a ticking time bomb. As Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh sat in silence, watching his vision unfold from behind sunglasses and the wheel of yet another Rolls-Royce, few could have predicted how dark this story would become. Within just a few years, the utopian dream would collapse into paranoia, crime, and the largest bioterror attack in American history. What began with the promise of love and spiritual liberation would end in scandal, imprisonment, and exile. The arrival of the guru had set the stage not for salvation, but for America's most chilling cult saga. Origins of Rajneesh. To understand how the Rajneesh movement found its way to the high desert of Oregon, we must return to India in the 1960s and 70s, where its controversial leader first rose to prominence. Born Chandramohan Jain in 1931 in central India, the man who would become Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh showed early signs of rebelliousness and intellectual brilliance. He studied philosophy, earning degrees and eventually teaching at Jabalpur University. But academic life could not contain him. His lectures challenged tradition, mocked orthodox religion, and called for radical freedom of the individual. By the late 1960s, Rajneesh had begun to gather a following. His talks, delivered in Hindi and English, blended Eastern mysticism with Western psychology and philosophy. He spoke of Nietzsche, Freud, and Zen in the same breath. What drew followers most was his uncompromising emphasis on personal freedom, particularly sexual freedom. At a time when India was still deeply conservative, Rajneesh's call for open relationships and sexual experimentation shocked many, while attracting a growing audience of the curious and the disillusioned. By the early 1970s, Rajneesh had established his first ashram in Pune. There, seekers from across India and the world flocked to hear his teachings and participate in his dynamic meditation techniques. These sessions were designed to break down inhibitions through intense physical activity, breathing exercises, and cathartic release. For some, it was liberation. For others, it looked more like chaos. Western visitors in particular were captivated. Young travelers from Europe, America, and Australia, disillusioned with traditional institutions, found in Rajneesh a guru who spoke their language and validated their desires. The ashram in Pune quickly became notorious. Photographs of scantily clad Westerners dancing ecstatically alongside Indian devotees circulated in the press. Rajneesh became known as the sex guru, a label he did not reject. At the same time, he attracted wealthy patrons who donated generously, fueling the rapid expansion of his commune. Luxury cars began to appear. Rumors spread of indulgence, elitism, and exploitation. For Rajneesh, these criticisms were irrelevant. He insisted that spirituality and material wealth were not contradictory, but complementary. "I'm the rich man's guru," he once said unapologetically. Yet controversies mounted. Indian authorities investigated the ashram for alleged tax evasion, zoning violations, and other irregularities. Neighbors complained about the noise, the traffic, and the scandalous reputation the commune brought to their city. Meanwhile, Rajneesh's health declined, and tensions grew within his inner circle. By the late 1970s, the movement was at a crossroads. Would it remain a countercultural enclave in India or seek new horizons abroad? The answer came with the decision to relocate to the United States. America, with its vast open spaces, constitutional protection of religion, and growing countercultural movements, seemed the ideal setting for Rajneesh's vision of a utopian community. The choice was also pragmatic. Pressure from Indian authorities made continued operation in Pune increasingly untenable. Facing investigations and public hostility, Rajneesh and his closest disciples quietly prepared for departure. In 1981, he traveled to America under the guise of needing medical treatment. Behind the scenes, however, his organization was already negotiating the purchase of a massive ranch in Oregon. It was the beginning of an experiment on a scale few could have imagined. The creation of a self-sustaining city in the desert, populated by thousands of devoted followers and governed according to the teachings of their guru. The origins of Rajneesh's movement thus combined philosophy, rebellion, controversy, and opportunism. His call for freedom and ecstasy resonated with disillusioned seekers, but his rejection of tradition and embrace of excess made him a lightning rod for criticism. By the time he left India, he was already one of the most polarizing spiritual leaders of the 20th century. To some, he was a liberator. To others, a dangerous fraud. What was certain was that his journey to America would take the Rajneesh movement into uncharted and ultimately perilous territory. Buying the land in Oregon. In 1981, as Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh made his way quietly into the United States, his followers were already laying the groundwork for the boldest phase of his vision. At the heart of their plan was the acquisition of a vast piece of land that would serve as the canvas for their utopian experiment. That land was the Big Muddy Ranch, a sprawling 64,000-acre property in Wasco County, Oregon, larger than some American cities and remote enough to give the Rajneeshees both privacy and freedom from immediate scrutiny. The purchase was orchestrated through a network of shell corporations and front organizations designed to conceal the true purpose. The ranch had once been used for cattle grazing, but was largely desolate, with arid soil and limited infrastructure. Its isolation was both a challenge and an opportunity. For the Rajneeshees, it offered a blank slate chance to build their own city from the ground up. For locals, once they learned who had moved in, it became a cause for alarm. The plan was ambitious. Rajneesh's followers envisioned not just a commune, but a fully functioning municipality, complete with roads, houses, schools, farms, an airstrip, a dam, and a central meditation hall. They called it Rajneeshpuram, the city of Rajneesh. At its peak, it would house thousands of residents, making it one of the largest intentional communities in modern American history. Supporters hailed it as a groundbreaking experiment in spiritual living. Critics saw it as the establishment of a cult fortress on American soil. Early arrivals worked around the clock, transforming the barren ranch into a bustling construction site. Bulldozers carved out roads, engineers laid pipes and power lines, and volunteers built dormitories and dining halls. The desert echoed with the sounds of hammering and chanting, machinery and music. For many of the sannyasins, the work itself was a form of devotion, a physical manifestation of their dedication to their master. But the Rajneeshees were not content to remain isolated. Almost immediately, they began purchasing property in the nearby town of Antelope. Population less than 100. Their influx was overwhelming. Within months, they owned multiple businesses and residences, and their voting bloc began to sway local politics. When residents pushed back, the Rajneeshees responded by asserting their legal rights, running candidates for town council, and outmaneuvering opponents. By 1982, they had effectively taken over Antelope, even renaming it Rajneesh. The locals, many of them lifelong ranchers and conservative Christians, felt besieged. News reports from the time feature elderly residents expressing disbelief that their quiet town had been transformed overnight into the outpost of an international cult. Their fears were not entirely unfounded. Rajneeshpuram's population quickly swelled into the thousands, with estimates ranging between 2,000 and 7,000 residents at its height. The sheer scale of the commune dwarfed the surrounding towns and shifted the balance of political power in Wasco County. Legal battles soon followed. Questions arose about whether Rajneeshpuram was truly a city or a religious organization masquerading as one. Opponents argued that its incorporation violated the separation of church and state. Federal and state officials launched investigations into land use, immigration practices, and financial dealings. Each inquiry only deepened the paranoia and defensiveness within the commune. Inside Rajneeshpuram, however, life thrived at least in the early years. Followers described the exhilaration of building a city from scratch, of living in harmony with fellow believers, and of contributing to what they saw as the dawn of a new era. They wore their red and orange robes proudly, seeing themselves as pioneers of a spiritual revolution. Each day was filled with work, meditation, and celebration, fueled by the belief that they were creating a model for the future. But for outsiders, the scale of the project and the fervor of its participants were deeply unsettling. Rumors spread of mind control, sexual exploitation, and authoritarian rule. The Rolls-Royces that ferried Bhagwan to and from his quarters became symbols of both opulence and excess. For critics, the image of a silent guru surrounded by armed guards in the Oregon desert crystallized their worst fears about cult power. The purchase of the Big Muddy Ranch was thus more than a real estate transaction. It was a turning point. It transformed Rajneesh's movement from a loose network of ashrams and followers into a territorial, physical, political, and legal presence that could no longer be ignored. The seeds of future conflict had been sown, and the barren soil of Wasco County would soon bear witness to a struggle that combined faith, power, and fear in equal measure. Building utopia. Once the Big Muddy Ranch was secured and transformed into Rajneeshpuram, the project shifted into an astonishing phase of rapid development. Followers of Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh, clad in their signature red and orange robes, worked day and night to turn the barren Oregon desert into what they believed would be a thriving utopia. For the sannyasins, as they were called, this was more than construction, it was devotion, the physical expression of their spiritual mission. The pace of building was extraordinary. Bulldozers cut roads into the hills. Tents gave way to prefabricated houses and dormitories. Dining halls capable of serving thousands of meals a day were erected. Farms and greenhouses sprang up to grow vegetables, while crews dug irrigation ditches and installed pipelines to make the arid soil productive. In a matter of months, the landscape shifted from desolation to activity, buzzing with the sounds of hammers, tractors, and chants from meditating workers. At the heart of Rajneeshpuram was the belief that this city represented a new model for society. Its residents imagined a world beyond traditional politics, religion, and family structures. Work was communal, property was shared, and life was organized around the teachings of Bhagwan. Daily meditation sessions reinforced devotion, while festivals and celebrations offered catharsis and unity. For many, the sheer scale of the transformation was exhilarating. They felt they were witnessing history in the making. The city also featured modern amenities. The commune established its own fire department, police force, postal service, and transportation system. It had an airport capable of handling small planes, a dam to secure water, and even its own shopping district. These developments astonished outsiders. What looked at first like a group of eccentric mystics had quickly evolved into a self-sufficient city-state, rivaling nearby towns in size and infrastructure. Central to the commune's identity was its massive meditation hall, designed to accommodate thousands of worshippers. Here, followers engaged in Rajneesh's dynamic meditation practices sessions that often involved screaming, laughing, crying, dancing, and collapsing into silence. These rituals, intended to strip away inhibitions and bring spiritual awakening, reinforced the collective sense of purpose and belonging. For outsiders who glimpsed them, however, they often looked chaotic, even disturbing. Culturally, Rajneeshpuram presented itself as progressive, liberated, and joyous. Music festivals drew thousands. Theater and dance performances became regular events. The residents wore bright colors, embraced sexual openness, and celebrated the teachings of their master with fervor. The community radiated confidence that they were building not only a home, but a model for humanity's future. Yet beneath the surface of this apparent utopia were tensions. The commune's rapid expansion strained resources and heightened suspicions among locals. Critics questioned the legality of Rajneeshpuram's incorporation as a city, arguing that it blurred the line between church and state. Journalists reported on the lavish lifestyle of Bhagwan himself, who, despite preaching detachment, was chauffeured in a fleet of Rolls-Royces and adorned with luxury watches and jewelry. For his disciples, these were symbols of his transcendence. For his critics, they were signs of hypocrisy and exploitation. Inside the commune, dissent was not easily tolerated. Leadership positions were tightly controlled by Bhagwan's inner circle, particularly his powerful secretary, Ma Anand Sheela. Those who questioned policies or sought more independence were sidelined or pressured to leave. Stories began to circulate of manipulation, surveillance, and coercion. The ideal of freedom, so central to Rajneesh's teachings, was increasingly compromised by the authoritarian reality of daily life. Despite these problems, for many residents, the early years of Rajneeshpuram were unforgettable. They recalled the exhilaration of building something monumental, the sense of community that erased loneliness, and the belief that they were part of a spiritual revolution. Their memories of this time often glow with nostalgia, even as the darker aspects of the commune's evolution became clear. The construction of Rajneeshpuram, thus, represents a paradox. On one hand, it was a remarkable feat of organization and devotion, a city literally built from nothing in a matter of months. On the other, it was the foundation of conflicts legal, cultural, and moral that would soon spiral out of control. What began as the dream of a utopia was already showing cracks that would widen into scandal and collapse. Conflict with locals has continued to grow. Its sheer scale and the fervor of its followers inevitably brought it into direct conflict with the surrounding communities. Nowhere was this clash more visible than in the tiny town of Antelope, Oregon. With fewer than 100 residents, Antelope had been a sleepy ranching settlement where neighbors knew one another by name. Suddenly, it found itself outnumbered by hundreds of strangers in red and orange robes, whose presence seemed both overwhelming and alien. At first, the locals reacted with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Some saw economic opportunities in the influx of Rajneeshees, who bought property, frequented stores, and injected money into the local economy. But the cultural divide was immense. Antelope's residents were largely conservative, Christian, and deeply tied to traditional rural values. The Rajneeshees, by contrast, were cosmopolitan, sexually liberated, and devoted to a guru who remained aloof and surrounded by opulence. What might have been a simple culture clash quickly escalated into open hostility. The Rajneeshees began purchasing land and businesses in Antelope, rapidly becoming the majority property holders. With voting power on their side, they soon dominated the town council. Longtime residents watched in disbelief as their institutions were taken over, their way of life altered. In a symbolic move, the Rajneeshees even renamed the town Rajneesh, a gesture that many locals considered nothing short of an invasion. The name change crystallized fears that their community was being erased. Legal battles intensified the conflict. Questions arose about the legitimacy of Rajneeshpuram as an incorporated city. Critics argued that it violated the constitutional separation of church and state, as the entire municipality revolved around a single religious figure. Lawsuits were filed, hearings held, and state officials began investigating land use, building codes, and the commune's aggressive expansion. To the Rajneeshees, these were acts of persecution. To their opponents, they were necessary defenses against a group that seemed intent on subverting American law. Tensions spilled into daily life. Locals complained of being harassed when they traveled near Rajneesh-owned properties. Rumors circulated of surveillance, intimidation, and even violence. The Rajneeshees, for their part, accused the townspeople of bigotry, of refusing to accept outsiders with different beliefs. The narrative hardened. To the Rajneeshees, they were pioneers building a spiritual utopia against hostile neighbors. To the townspeople, they were invaders threatening to dismantle their way of life. The media amplified the story. National outlets descended on Wasco County, drawn by the bizarre spectacle of an Indian guru with a fleet of Rolls-Royces and thousands of Western followers attempting to build a city in the desert. Images of ecstatic disciples dancing in fields were juxtaposed with interviews of grim-faced ranchers describing their fears. The narrative of utopia versus nightmare took hold, turning Oregon into a stage for a broader cultural drama. Political leaders in Oregon and beyond also weighed in. State officials expressed concern about the commune's legal maneuvers, while local politicians faced pressure from constituents to take action. The conflict escalated into a test case for the limits of religious freedom in America. How far could a movement go in establishing its own rules and structures before it collided with the authority of the state? By the mid-1980s, relations between the commune and its neighbors had deteriorated to the point of open hostility. Security at Rajneeshpuram was increased, with armed guards patrolling entrances. Locals spoke of feeling under siege. The dream of peaceful coexistence was long gone. Instead, what remained was a standoff, two communities locked in mutual distrust, each convinced the other posed an existential threat. The conflict with locals was more than just a backdrop to the story of Rajneeshpuram. It was a catalyst, driving the commune toward increasingly extreme measures. As the hostility deepened, so too did the paranoia of its leaders. What began as a culture clash was transforming into a dangerous spiral that would soon engulf not just Antelope and Wasco County, but the entire state of Oregon and eventually the United States government itself. Rise of Ma Anand Sheela. At the center of the Rajneesh movement's transformation from spiritual commune to political powerhouse stood one woman, Ma Anand Sheela. Charismatic, sharp-tongued, and fiercely loyal to her guru, Sheela rose from the ranks of disciples to become Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh's personal secretary and, for all practical purposes, the chief executive of Rajneeshpuram. Her ascent marked a turning point in the history of the commune, for under her leadership the utopian vision hardened into a regime of control, manipulation, and confrontation. Sheela, born Sheela Umbalal Patel in India in 1949, had come to Rajneesh in the 1970s as a devoted follower. By the time the commune moved to Oregon, she had earned his trust and confidence to such a degree that she became his closest aide. Rajneesh himself had entered a period of silence, retreating from public discourse and limiting his appearances. In his absence, Sheela became the voice and face of the movement. Her speeches, delivered in sharp tones and laced with biting humor, were broadcast widely, cementing her reputation as both admired leader and feared antagonist. Sheela's leadership style was confrontational and unapologetic. Where Bhagwan exuded an aura of spiritual detachment, Sheela thrived on direct engagement, especially with the commune's enemies. She accused local residents of bigotry, ridiculed journalists, and dismissed politicians as hypocrites. Her fiery rhetoric galvanized the sannyasins, giving them a sense of defiance against the outside world. To critics, however, she embodied the arrogance and aggression they feared in the movement. Under Sheela's direction, Rajneeshpuram became increasingly militarized. Armed guards patrolled its borders, security systems were expanded, and internal surveillance grew commonplace. Dissent within the commune was discouraged, sometimes ruthlessly. Former members later recalled an atmosphere of intimidation, where questioning Sheela's authority or, by extension, Bhagwan scowled, lead to ostracism or expulsion. The dream of liberation was steadily giving way to the reality of authoritarian rule. Sheela also masterminded the commune's political strategy. Recognizing that sheer numbers could translate into political power, she pushed the Rajneeshees to register to vote in local elections, to run for public office, and to use every legal tool at their disposal to consolidate influence. The takeover of Antelope was just the beginning. By the mid-1980s, Rajneeshpuram was exerting influence over Wasco County politics in unprecedented ways. To supporters, this was democracy in action. To opponents, it was a hostile infiltration. Her tactics extended beyond politics. Sheela was accused of orchestrating campaigns of harassment against critics of the movement, including journalists and former members. Reports emerged of phone tapping, spying, and even plots to silence dissidents permanently. Whether all these accusations were true or fueled by paranoia, they added to the sense that the commune was spiraling into extremism under her watch. Perhaps most controversial was Sheela's role in cultivating an image of Bhagwan that was both exalted and insulated. She managed his daily affairs, controlled access to him, and ensured that his image remained untarnished among the faithful. Meanwhile, his lifestyle became ever more extravagant. Fleets of Rolls-Royces, diamond-studded watches, and luxurious residences. To many outsiders, this was evidence of a cult exploiting its followers. To the disciples, it was proof of their guru's transcendence, orchestrated and amplified by Sheela's careful management. The rise of Ma Anand Sheela thus reshaped the trajectory of Rajneeshpuram. Her leadership injected the commune with new energy, but also new dangers. She was both the protector of the movement and the architect of its most aggressive strategies. In time, her decisions would push Rajneeshpuram into direct confrontation with state and federal authorities, setting the stage for the dramatic downfall to come. For now, however, Sheela reigned supreme. She was the gatekeeper to Bhagwan, the commander of his city, and the woman who turned a dream of utopia into a fortress of defiance. To the faithful, she was a heroine. To everyone else, she was the embodiment of everything terrifying about the Rajneesh movement. The cult lifestyle. Life inside Rajneeshpuram was unlike anything most of its residents or outsiders had ever experienced. For the thousands of devotees who flocked to the Oregon desert, the commune represented not just a place to live, but a way of life radically different from mainstream America. It was, for many, the ultimate experiment in spiritual living, though for others, it became a crucible of control and contradiction. The day at Rajneeshpuram began early. Residents, dressed in the movement's signature hues of red, orange, and maroon, gathered for meditation sessions that often involved cathartic techniques developed by Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh himself. Known as dynamic meditations, these practices combined intense breathing, shouting, dancing, and silence, designed to break down inhibitions and induce altered states of consciousness. Participants often described feelings of ecstasy, liberation, and unity. To outsiders, the sessions looked frenzied, even chaotic. Work was central to daily life. Sannyasins labored on construction crews, farms, kitchens, and maintenance teams, building the city from scratch and keeping it running. For many, the work was a form of devotion, a physical offering to their master. Slogans within the commune emphasized surrender, dedication, and collective effort. Though tasks were demanding, residents often spoke of a sense of joy in contributing to something larger than themselves. Sexual openness was another defining feature. Rajneesh's teachings emphasized the breaking of taboos and the embracing of desire as a path to enlightenment. Relationships within the commune were fluid, with many residents engaging in multiple partnerships. This sexual freedom attracted young Western seekers disillusioned with conservative societies, though it also fueled criticism and scandal outside the commune. For critics, it was evidence of immorality. For devotees, it was liberation from repression. Materially, life was communal but not impoverished. Meals were served in large dining halls, often vegetarian and prepared en masse. Housing varied from dormitory-style accommodations to more private residences for senior members. Though possessions were limited, the sense of belonging and shared purpose compensated for material scarcity. Festivals, music, and theatrical performances brought color and joy to daily existence. Yet life in Rajneeshpuram was not free of contradictions. While residents embraced ideals of freedom and openness, strict hierarchies governed the commune. At the top was Bhagwan, followed by his inner circle, especially Ma Anand Sheela, who exerted tight control over policy, discipline, and access to the guru. Surveillance and monitoring of residents became increasingly common. Those who challenged authority risked marginalization or expulsion. What began as a community of seekers evolved into a structure with distinctly authoritarian overtones. The disparity between the guru's lifestyle and that of his followers was also stark. While residents labored long hours in the Oregon sun, Bhagwan remained secluded, appearing occasionally in public, often riding in one of his dozens of Rolls-Royces. His luxury possession, jewelry, watches, and designer clothes were celebrated by disciples as symbols of his transcendence. Yet to critics, they epitomized hypocrisy and exploitation. Devotees rationalized the opulence as a reflection of his detachment from material desire, while outsiders saw manipulation. For many members, however, the contradictions did not diminish the power of their experience. Testimonies from former sannyasins described the years in Rajneeshpuram as some of the most intense and transformative of their lives. They recall feelings of love, ecstasy, and spiritual awakening, as well as deep bonds with fellow residents. At the same time, many acknowledge the darker dimensions, the coercion, the paranoia, and the erosion of individual freedom. Daily life in Rajneeshpuram was thus a paradox. It offered liberation and belonging, yet demanded conformity and control. It promised freedom but enforced discipline. To some, it was a paradise in the desert. To others, a gilded cage. What is clear is that the lifestyle of the commune played a central role in both its allure and its eventual downfall. It was the rhythm of life, itself ecstatic, exhausting, and tightly bound to the will of Bhagwan and Sheela that sustained Rajneeshpuram, even as it paved the way for its collapse. Escalation and weapons. By the mid-1980s, the utopian image of Rajneeshpuram had begun to crack, and what emerged was far more menacing. As tensions with local residents, state officials, and federal authorities escalated, the commune increasingly adopted the mentality of a fortress under siege. Nowhere was this more evident than in its growing reliance on weapons, security, and intimidation. At the direction of Ma Anand Sheela and the inner circle, Rajneeshpuram developed a sophisticated security apparatus. Armed guards were stationed at the gates and patrolled the perimeter of the ranch. Visitors were monitored closely, and entry was tightly controlled. Residents of Wasco County who ventured near the commune spoke of the unsettling sight of disciples in red robes carrying firearms, an image that seemed to confirm their worst fears about the movement. The commune also began stockpiling weapons. Reports later revealed caches of semi-automatic rifles, handguns, and thousands of rounds of ammunition. Officially, these were for self-defense, justified by Sheela as necessary to protect the community against what she described as hostile outsiders. But to law enforcement and locals, it looked like preparation for conflict. The sight of a religious commune transforming into an armed encampment alarmed not only Oregon, but the entire nation. Training exercises further reinforced this image. Members of the commune were drilled in handling firearms, practicing military-style maneuvers in the Oregon desert. For many sannyasins who had once come seeking spiritual liberation, the shift toward paramilitary discipline was disorienting. Yet the climate of paranoia, fueled by Sheela's fiery rhetoric, made such measures seem inevitable. The commune increasingly portrayed itself as a victim, encircled by enemies intent on destroying their dream. Inside the commune, surveillance expanded. Phones were tapped, conversations recorded, and residents monitored for signs of dissent. Those who questioned the leadership's tactics risked being labeled traitors and forced out. Fear and loyalty worked hand in hand, binding the community even as it hardened against the outside world. The militarization of Rajneeshpuram also had political implications. Armed with numbers and weapons, the commune exerted increasing pressure on Wasco County politics. The takeover of Antelope had demonstrated the power of the ballot. Now, the threat of force loomed in the background of every political maneuver. Locals felt not just outvoted but outgunned. The contradictions within the movement grew sharper. Rajneesh himself, largely silent and secluded, continued to project an image of transcendence. His public appearances chauffeured rides in Rolls-Royces. Silent waves to crowds of cheering disciples seemed far removed from the militarization taking place around him. Whether he condoned or ignored Sheela's escalation remains a subject of debate. What is clear is that his absence from governance allowed Sheela and her loyalists to steer the commune toward increasingly dangerous extremes. For outsiders, the armed commune confirmed fears of a cult gone rogue. The combination of spiritual devotion, authoritarian leadership, and stockpiled weapons evoked comparisons to other high-control groups and foreshadowed tragedies yet to come in American history. Media coverage fixated on the spectacle of red-robed disciples with guns, amplifying the sense of imminent danger. The escalation of weapons and security at Rajneeshpuram marked a turning point. The commune was no longer simply a spiritual experiment or even a political movement. It was now perceived as a potential armed threat. This perception would shape the actions of law enforcement and federal agencies in the months to come. What had begun as a dream of love and meditation had hardened into an armed enclave, preparing for battles both real and imagined. The bioterror attack. In 1984, the Rajneesh movement crossed a line that would forever mark its place in American history. What had begun as a spiritual experiment and evolved into a political standoff now escalated into a deliberate act of bioterrorism, first and largest of its kind on U.S. soil. The goal was as audacious as it was disturbing: to incapacitate local voters and thereby seize control of political power in Wasco County. At the heart of the plot was Ma Anand Sheela and her loyal inner circle. Facing mounting opposition from locals, legal challenges, and state authorities, the leadership of Rajneeshpuram sought ways to tip the balance in their favor. They understood that controlling the county government could shield the commune from hostile legislation and investigations. But with local voters firmly against them, the odds were stacked. Their solution was chilling: make the opposition too sick to cast their ballots. The weapon chosen was Salmonella typhimurium, a common bacterium that causes food poisoning. Members of Sheela's team acquired cultures of the bacteria from a medical supply company and began experiments in Rajneeshpuram's on-site laboratory. The plan was to contaminate salad bars and other self-serve foods in local restaurants in the Dallas, the county seat. By causing a widespread outbreak of illness, they hoped to suppress voter turnout just long enough to swing the election in their favor. In the summer of 1984, the plan was put into action. Commune operatives, dressed inconspicuously, visited restaurants and sprinkled the bacteria onto food items. Soon, residents of the Dallas began falling ill with severe gastrointestinal symptoms. Over the course of weeks, more than 750 people were sickened. Though no one died, the outbreak overwhelmed local hospitals and spread panic throughout the community. At first, the source of the outbreak was a mystery. Health officials investigated food handling practices, sanitation, and supply chains, but found no immediate explanation. Only later, when insiders from the commune came forward, did the truth emerge. This was not a natural occurrence, but a deliberate act of biological sabotage. The revelation stunned the nation. Never before had a religious movement in America engaged in bioterrorism. The act shattered any remaining illusions about Rajneeshpuram as a benign spiritual community. It confirmed the worst fears of critics who had warned that the commune was dangerous, and it galvanized law enforcement to act decisively. For the Rajneeshees, the plot ultimately failed. Voter turnout in the county was not significantly affected, and the plan to seize political power collapsed. Instead, the bioterror attack became the commune's undoing. Investigations intensified, informants came forward, and federal authorities zeroed in on the leadership. The very act intended to secure the commune's future instead ensured its destruction. The bioterror attack of 1984 remains the largest domestic act of biological terrorism in U.S. history. It demonstrated how a charismatic leader, an insular community, and a climate of paranoia could combine to produce actions once unthinkable. It also highlighted the vulnerabilities of public health systems and the dangers of underestimating fringe movements. For the people of Wasco County, the memory of the outbreak lingered long after the commune dissolved. It was not only the physical sickness, but the psychological trauma, the realization that their neighbors had deliberately poisoned them that left deep scars. For America at large, it was a wake-up call to the potential for cults to cross the line from eccentricity to criminality, and from utopian dreams to acts of terror. FBI investigations. The 1984 bioterror attack in the Dallas marked a turning point, drawing the full attention of federal law enforcement. Until then, state and local authorities had struggled to contain the escalating tensions between Rajneeshpuram and the surrounding communities. But the deliberate contamination of food supplies crossed a line that demanded national intervention. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, working alongside the Oregon State Police and the Center for Disease Control, launched one of the most intensive probes of a religious movement in American history. For the FBI, the case was a complex challenge. The Rajneesh commune was vast, self-contained, and tightly controlled by Ma Anand Sheela and her loyal inner circle. Access to the ranch was restricted, and potential witnesses feared retaliation. Nevertheless, investigators began to piece together evidence from a combination of insider testimony, forensic analysis, and surveillance. Key breakthroughs came when disillusioned members of the commune defected and began cooperating with authorities. These insiders described the existence of a laboratory on the ranch where bacterial cultures had been grown, as well as meetings where Sheela and her associates plotted strategies to neutralize opponents. Their accounts confirmed suspicions that the salmonella outbreak had been intentional, transforming what had once seemed like a bizarre rumor into documented fact. FBI agents also uncovered evidence of broader criminal activity. Beyond bioterrorism, the Rajneeshees were implicated in immigration fraud, wiretapping, and even conspiracy to commit murder. Surveillance revealed that dissident members of the commune were being monitored and in some cases targeted by Sheela's enforcers. The scope of criminality shocked investigators, who now saw Rajneeshpuram not simply as a religious community in conflict with its neighbors, but as a hub of organized crime. The investigation culminated in dramatic raids. Federal agents, backed by state troopers, moved into Rajneeshpuram to execute search warrants. They discovered stockpiles of weapons, listening devices, and documents that detailed the commune's internal operations. Laboratory equipment confirmed the production of salmonella cultures, providing the forensic proof needed to link the commune to the bioterror attack. As evidence mounted, Ma Anand Sheela and several of her closest associates fled the country, eventually captured in Germany and extradited to the United States. Their trials brought to light the extent of the commune's activities, with prosecutors presenting a damning case of conspiracy, assault, and criminal intent. Sheela was ultimately convicted and sentenced to prison, though she served only a fraction of her sentence. For Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh, the FBI's investigation presented both a crisis and an opportunity. Publicly, he distanced himself from Sheela, accusing her of betrayal and criminal excess. Privately, however, his position weakened as investigators probed his finances, immigration status, and knowledge of the crimes. Though no direct evidence tied him to the bioterror attack, The atmosphere of criminality engulfing Rajneeshpuram made his continued presence in America untenable. The FBI investigation not only dismantled the Rajneesh organization, but also left a lasting legacy. It demonstrated how religious movements could evolve into criminal enterprises under charismatic and authoritarian leadership. It highlighted the vulnerabilities of democratic institutions when confronted by well-organized cults. And it underscored the importance of federal coordination in addressing threats that crossed local and state boundaries. By 1985, the investigation had effectively broken the back of Rajneeshpuram. Leaders were jailed or deported, the commune was fractured, and the dream of utopia lay in ruins. For the FBI, it was a victory. For the thousands of sannyasins who had given their lives to the movement, it was a devastating reckoning. And for America, it was a chilling reminder that even in the land of the free, utopian dreams could mask dangerous nightmares. Collapse of Rajneeshpuram. By late 1985, the dream of Rajneeshpuram had crumbled under the weight of its own contradictions, scandals, and criminal exposures. What had once been hailed by followers as a utopian experiment in spiritual living was now unraveling rapidly. Its leaders fleeing, its members disillusioned, and its charismatic guru caught in the crosshairs of federal authorities. The turning point came with the departure of Ma Anand Sheela. Facing mounting investigations and internal dissent, Sheela and several of her closest lieutenants abruptly fled the United States in September 1985. Their departure created a leadership vacuum and sparked a dramatic shift in the commune's narrative. For years, Sheela had been both the protector and enforcer of the movement, running the day-to-day operations of Rajneeshpuram while shielding Bhagwan from direct responsibility. Now, in her absence, Rajneesh himself stepped forward to speak. Breaking his long silence, Bhagwan launched a series of public addresses condemning Sheela and her inner circle. He accused them of corruption, abuse, and criminal activity, portraying himself as an innocent spiritual leader betrayed by those closest to him. His disciples, eager for reassurance, applauded his candor. To outsiders, however, his sudden willingness to denounce Sheela raised new questions about how much he had known and tolerated while she was in power. Meanwhile, the exodus of Sheela revealed the full extent of the commune's troubles. Law enforcement raids uncovered weapons, wiretapping equipment, and evidence of elaborate plots, including poisonings and assassination attempts. Former members came forward with chilling testimonies of intimidation and control. The image of Rajneeshpuram as a peaceful spiritual experiment was shattered beyond repair. The psychological toll on members was immense. Many sannyasins, who had poured years of labor and devotion into building the city, now faced the devastating reality that their community was collapsing. Some clung to Rajneesh's new narrative, blaming Sheela for the excesses. Others quietly departed, disillusioned and brokenhearted. What remained was confusion, fear, and a sense of betrayal. The legal and financial pressures on Rajneeshpuram intensified. With Sheela gone, federal investigators turned their focus more squarely on Bhagwan. Immigration fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy charges loomed. Rajneesh attempted to deflect, offering cooperation with authorities and continuing to cast himself as the victim of Sheela's machinations. But the sheer scale of the criminal evidence surrounding the commune made his position increasingly untenable. In October 1985, as federal agents closed in, Rajneesh attempted to flee the United States in a chartered plane. He was arrested in North Carolina after a dramatic interstate pursuit, charged with multiple counts of immigration fraud and conspiracy. Though he avoided trial through a plea bargain, agreeing to leave the country, the spectacle of his arrest symbolized the definitive collapse of his American experiment. The fall of Rajneeshpuram was swift and final. Within months, the once thriving commune was deserted. Buildings fell into disrepair, property was sold off, and the dream of a self-sustaining city of love and meditation dissolved into dust. For the residents of Wasco County, the collapse brought relief but also lasting scars. They had endured years of intimidation, bioterrorism, and conflict. For many, trust in outsiders and in government protections was forever shaken. For former sannyasins, the collapse was more complicated. Some returned to ordinary life, trying to reconcile their devotion with the revelations of corruption. Others continued to follow Rajneesh, who rebranded himself as Osho after leaving the U.S. and resumed teaching in India. The legacy of Rajneeshpuram remained deeply polarizing. To some, a cautionary tale of cult excess. To others, a misunderstood spiritual revolution undone by power struggles. The collapse of Rajneeshpuram thus marked the end of one of the most extraordinary social experiments in modern America. It was a reminder of the fragility of utopian visions when confronted by law, culture, and human ambition. What began with the promise of enlightenment ended in scandal, exile, and ruins scattered across the Oregon desert. Arrest of Osho. The dramatic unraveling of Rajneeshpuram reached its climax with the arrest of Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh himself. For years, he had remained an enigmatic figure, silent, secluded, and insulated by his inner circle, particularly Ma Anand Sheela. But with Sheela's departure and the commune in disarray, federal authorities shifted their attention squarely onto the guru at the movement center. In October 1985, as investigations intensified, Rajneesh made a fateful decision. Attempting to avoid prosecution, he boarded a Learjet with several of his closest aides, intending to flee the United States. His plan was to reach Bermuda, a jurisdiction without an extradition treaty, and from there seek asylum. But federal agents were tracking his movements. After a multi-state pursuit, his jet was forced to land in North Carolina, where he was arrested along with his companions. The charges leveled against him were serious: 35 counts of immigration fraud, conspiracy, and lying to federal authorities. Though the bioterror attack had been directly linked to Sheela and her associates, investigators believed Rajneesh bore responsibility for creating the conditions in which such crimes occurred. His lavish lifestyle, his control over disciples, and his knowledge of the commune's inner workings made it difficult to argue complete ignorance. Rajneesh's arrest was a media spectacle. Images of the once revered guru in handcuffs shocked his followers and delighted his critics. For many Americans, it was vindication, the fall of a figure they saw as manipulative and dangerous. For his disciples, it was devastating. Some refused to believe the charges, convinced their master was the victim of government persecution. Others were shaken, forced to reconcile their faith with the reality of criminal indictments. After weeks of legal wrangling, Rajneesh accepted a plea bargain. He agreed to plead guilty to 2 counts of immigration fraud, pay a fine of $400,000, and leave the United States. In return, the more serious charges were dropped. The arrangement spared him a lengthy trial, but ensured his permanent departure from the country. On November 14, 1985, he boarded a plane and was deported, his American experiment officially over. For the U.S. government, the resolution was pragmatic. It removed a polarizing figure and dissolved the commune without the need for protracted court battles. For Rajneesh, it was both a humiliation and an opportunity. He would later claim that he had been poisoned while in federal custody, a charge never substantiated but widely circulated among his followers. Such narratives allowed him to recast himself not as a criminal, but as a martyr of political persecution. In the aftermath of his deportation, Rajneesh returned briefly to India and then traveled through several countries, often facing visa denials and expulsions. Eventually, he settled once again in Pune, where he rebranded himself as Osho. Shedding the title of Bhagwan, he sought to distance himself from the scandals of Oregon while continuing to teach. His discourses, recorded and distributed globally, attracted new audiences, though the shadow of Rajneeshpuram never fully disappeared. The arrest of Rajneesh marked the definitive end of the American phase of his movement. It symbolized the collapse of a utopian dream built on contradictions, freedom paired with control, spirituality intertwined with opulence, and love corrupted by paranoia. For the residents of Wasco County, his removal brought closure, though the scars of conflict and bioterrorism endured. For the disciples who still revered him, it was merely another chapter in the saga of their beloved master. Ultimately, the image of Rajneesh being led away in custody remains one of the most enduring symbols of the commune's downfall. It was the moment when the illusion of untouchability shattered, when the man at the center of it all was forced to confront the laws of the very country where he had sought to build his utopia. In that moment, Rajneeshpuram was not only dismantled, it was disgraced in the eyes of the world. Returned to India and rebranding as Osho. After his deportation from the United States in 1985, Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh returned briefly to India, a man diminished but not defeated. Though his Oregon commune lay in ruins and his reputation in the West was scarred by scandal, he sought to redefine himself and his movement. The process of reinvention began with a new name, Osho. Upon arriving back in India, Rajneesh initially faced uncertainty. The Indian government, wary of his notoriety and the international controversy surrounding him, restricted his ability to travel and organize. Yet his disciples, both in India and abroad, remained loyal. They helped re-establish an ashram in Pune, the very city where his movement had first blossomed in the 1970s. The Pune ashram, rebranded as the Osho International Meditation Resort, became the nucleus of his revived teachings. The rebranding was strategic. Shedding the title of Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh, he adopted the name Osho, derived from an ancient Japanese word meaning master and later associated with oceanic experience. The new name signaled a fresh beginning, an effort to distance himself from the scandals of Oregon and the crimes of his lieutenants. It also allowed him to market his philosophy to new audiences untainted by the infamy of Rajneeshpuram. Osho's teachings in this final phase retained the core of his earlier philosophy: dynamic meditation, personal freedom, and the integration of Eastern mysticism with Western psychology. But he also emphasized lessons learned from the collapse of Rajneeshpuram. He criticized organized religion, authoritarian structures, and what he saw as the dangers of blind devotion. Ironically, many observers noted that these criticisms mirrored the very dynamics that had led to his commune's downfall. Despite the controversies, Osho's following grew. His discourses were recorded, transcribed, and distributed worldwide, reaching audiences in Europe, North America, and beyond. The ashram in Pune attracted thousands of visitors annually, many of them Western seekers still drawn to his message of liberation through meditation and sensuality. The rebranding proved effective. While the shadow of Rajneeshpuram lingered, the name Osho carried less baggage, particularly for new adherents unfamiliar with the details of the Oregon saga. Health, however, remained a challenge. Osho had long struggled with ailments, and his years in the United States had taken a toll. He claimed that he had been poisoned while in American custody, an allegation never substantiated but widely believed among his followers. Whether true or not, the narrative reinforced his image as a persecuted spiritual leader, a martyr to political forces that feared his teachings. In India, reactions to his return were mixed. Some saw him as a national embarrassment, a guru who had tarnished India's image on the global stage. Others regarded him as a charismatic teacher who continued to offer valuable insights despite his flaws. Authorities monitored his activities closely but largely allowed him to operate, perhaps recognizing that his influence, though significant, was no longer the disruptive force it had been in Oregon. By the late 1980s, Osho's health declined further. He continued to give discourses until shortly before his death in January 1990. His passing marked the end of an extraordinary, controversial Lithia journey that had taken him from the lecture halls of India to the deserts of Oregon, from global notoriety to rebranding as a spiritual icon under a new name. The rebranding as Osho ensured that his teachings outlived the scandals. Today, the Osho International Meditation Resort in Pune remains active, and his books and recorded talks continue to circulate worldwide. To some, he is remembered as a visionary who challenged conventions and offered tools for personal liberation. To others, he remains forever tainted by the crimes and chaos of Rajneeshpuram. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. A man of profound charisma and insight, undone by ambition, contradiction, and the darker impulses of those around him. Media and pop culture legacy. The story of the Rajneesh cult did not end with the collapse of Rajneeshpuram or even with the death of Osho in 1990. Instead, it lived on through the lens of media, documentaries, books, and popular culture, ensuring that the saga remained a subject of fascination and debate for decades to come. Even in the 1980s, as events unfolded in Oregon, the media played a pivotal role in shaping public perception. News outlets seized on the spectacle of red-robed disciples, the Rolls-Royces, and the bizarre mix of spirituality and scandal. Television coverage often portrayed the commune as a dangerous cult, emphasizing its excesses and conflicts with locals. This coverage helped cement an image of Rajneeshpuram in the American imagination as both exotic and threatening. In the years following the commune's collapse, a wave of books and exposes emerged. Former members published memoirs recounting their experiences, stories of devotion, disillusionment, and escape. Journalists and scholars analyzed the rise and fall of Rajneeshpuram as a case study in cult dynamics, authoritarianism, and the dangers of charismatic leadership. These accounts ensured that the commune remained a touchstone in discussions about new religious movements and the limits of religious freedom. Perhaps the most influential revival of interest came in 2018 with the release of the Netflix documentary series Wild Wild Country. The six-part series, directed by Chapman and McLean Way, provided an in-depth exploration of the Rajneesh saga, combining archival footage with interviews from former sannyasins, local residents, and officials. The documentary reignited global fascination with the story, sparking debates about whether Rajneesh was a visionary teacher undone by his followers or a manipulative leader who engineered chaos. It also introduced a new generation to the bizarre and chilling events in Oregon. Beyond documentaries, the Rajneesh saga permeated popular culture in subtler ways. References appeared in television shows, films, and music, often highlighting the surreal imagery of the commune. The sea of red robes, the Rolls-Royces, the guru in sunglasses. For many, these became shorthand for cult excess and the dangers of blind devotion. Academically, the Rajneesh case became a staple in sociology, religious studies, and criminology courses. Scholars examined it as a cautionary tale about the interplay of charisma, authority, and community. It offered insights into how utopian ideals could curdle into authoritarian control and how marginalized groups could spiral into criminality under external pressure and internal paranoia. For the local residents of Wasco County, however, the legacy was more personal. Decades later, many still recalled the fear and tension of living alongside the commune. Oral histories preserve the voices of ranchers, shopkeepers, and officials who had faced intimidation, bioterrorism, and political upheaval. Their memories, often overshadowed by the sensational aspects of the story, serve as reminders of the human cost of the experiment. The figure of Osho also lived on. His rebranded teachings continued to circulate globally, with meditation centers bearing his name operating in multiple countries. His books, many compiled from transcribed discourses, sold widely. For some followers, He remained a profound spiritual teacher whose vision was corrupted not by himself, but by those around him. For critics, his teachings were inseparable from the scandals, forever tainted by Rajneeshpuram. Ultimately, the media and pop culture legacy of the Rajneesh cult reflects the contradictions of the movement itself. It is at once a story of spiritual searching and human folly, of idealism and corruption, of liberation and control. Whether portrayed as tragedy, cautionary tale, or bizarre curiosity, the saga of Rajneeshpuram endures in the global imagination. The fact that it continues to be revisited through documentaries, books, and cultural references underscores its resonance. It was not merely a local conflict in rural Oregon, but a drama that touched on universal themes: power, faith, freedom, and the fragility of utopian dreams. In this sense, the legacy of Rajneeshpuram is not just his story, it is a mirror reflecting the enduring questions of human society. Legacy and lessons learned. The saga of the Rajneesh cult remains one of the most extraordinary and unsettling episodes in modern American history. From its improbable rise in the deserts of Oregon to its dramatic collapse, the movement embodied both the allure of utopian dreams and the perils of unchecked power. Its legacy continues to provoke debate, offering lessons about spirituality, politics, and the human search for meaning. Perhaps the most enduring lesson is the danger of charismatic leadership. Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh, later Osho, was, by all accounts, a man of immense intellect and magnetism. His teachings drew thousands, offering liberation from repression and a promise of joy. Yet his movement demonstrated how easily charisma can blur into authoritarianism, particularly when followers surrender critical thinking in exchange for belonging. The contradiction between his philosophy of freedom and the authoritarian practices at Rajneeshpuram stands as a cautionary tale for all new religious movements. Another lesson lies in the fragility of utopian experiments. Rajneeshpuram was, in many ways, a Marvelon entire city built from nothing in the Oregon desert, sustained by devotion and labor. For its residents, it offered purpose, community, and a sense of participation in something historic. But utopias, by their nature, struggle against the realities of law, culture, and human ambition. The conflicts with locals, the violations of American legal norms, and the paranoia of leadership expose the inherent tensions in trying to create a perfect society in an imperfect world. The bioterror attack of 1984 remains a sobering milestone. It demonstrated how movements can escalate from eccentricity to criminality, crossing lines once thought unthinkable. The deliberate poisoning of hundreds in the Dallas shattered the illusion that Rajneeshpuram was harmless. It also served as a reminder of the vulnerabilities of public health and the potential for fringe groups to exploit them. In the post-9/11 era, the attack has often been revisited as an early warning of the threats posed by non-state actors using unconventional weapons. For the local residents of Wasco County, the legacy is deeply personal. The years of conflict left scars of mistrust, fear, and resentment. Yet they also demonstrated resilience. Against overwhelming odds, a small rural community resisted an international movement that sought to dominate them. Their story is one of persistence in defense of democratic norms and local autonomy. For former sannyasins, the legacy is more complex. Many recall their time in Rajneeshpuram with a mix of nostalgia and regret. They remember the joy of community, the intensity of meditation, and the charisma of their guru. Yet they also acknowledge the manipulation, coercion, and disillusionment. Their testimonies reflect the duality of human experience, how the same environment can inspire transcendence for some and trauma for others. Osho's rebranded movement continues to attract followers worldwide, with meditation centers and published works carrying his teachings into the 21st century. For some, This ongoing presence affirms the lasting value of his insights, divorced from the failures of Rajneeshpuram. For critics, it raises troubling questions about accountability and memory, how a man associated with such scandal can still be revered as a spiritual guide. In popular culture, the Rajneesh saga endures as both curiosity and cautionary tale. Documentaries like Wild Wild Country ensure that new generations encounter the story, often with astonishment that such events unfolded in America. The images of red robes, Rolls Royces, and bioterror linger as symbols of the extremes to which human devotion and ambition can lead. Ultimately, the story of Rajneeshpuram is less about one man or one movement than it is about universal human dynamics. The yearning for meaning, the seduction of power, and the fragile line between faith and fanaticism. It reminds us that utopias can inspire but also deceive, that leaders can enlighten but also exploit, and that communities can create beauty even as they court destruction. The legacy of the Rajneesh cult, then, is not confined to the ruins of Oregon or the archives of documentaries. It is a living lesson, a reminder of the risks inherent in surrendering too much to any leader, ideology, or dream. It challenges us to seek freedom without abandoning responsibility, to embrace community without forsaking individuality, and to pursue transcendence without forgetting the grounding power of law and reason.